Section 5, New Member Integration Pathways. Chapter 26, Load-Bearing Compassion. Compassion that cannot carry weight does not endure. Every community that sets out to rehabilitate the vulnerable confronts the same structural tension. Care requires surplus. Without economic stability, governance clarity, and cultural coherence, even the most sincere commitment to healing will collapse under the pressure of unmet needs. The mistake is not compassion. The mistake is missequencing. When a community has a high concentration of acute dysfunction, trauma, addiction, mental illness, unemployment, instability, the demand for support outpaces its capacity to generate food, income, housing, and conflict resolution. Energy flows toward crisis management. Builders burn out. Governance becomes reactive rather than intentional. Scarcity intensifies interpersonal strain. Eventually, the very people the system intended to help suffer most from its fragility. Load-bearing compassion requires a foundation strong enough to absorb stress without cracking. A rehabilitation-oriented stewardship community cannot begin as a care facility. If its founding members consist primarily of those in need of stabilization, the care load will exceed the productive base. The result is predictable: burnout, conflict, resource depletion, and eventual fracture. Compassion collapses under its own weight when it lacks infrastructure. The first phase of stewardship must therefore be architectural. Founding members should be disproportionately composed of highly functional builders, those capable of implementing governance systems, sustaining food systems, managing cooperative enterprises, and enforcing anti-capture safeguards. The foundation culture must normalize contribution, accountability, and problem-solving, with members being characterized by discipline, stability, and economic productivity before it can responsibly absorb significant rehabilitation demand. There is also a psychological dimension to timing. The identity formed in a community's earliest stage becomes its cultural template. If the founding identity centers on crisis and brokenness, that narrative can harden into permanent fragility. If the founding identity centers on competence and stewardship, rehabilitation becomes integration into strength rather than accommodation of weakness. Culture determines trajectory as much as policy. This sequencing is not exclusionary elitism, it is load-bearing realism, preventative medicine for institutional collapse. This does not mean delaying compassion indefinitely. It means recognizing that sustainable care is an outcome of structure, not a substitute for it. A hospital cannot treat patients before it has walls, equipment, protocols, and trained staff. A stewardship community cannot absorb high care loads before it has governance discipline, economic resilience, and conflict resolution maturity. Vulnerability deserves protection, and protection requires capacity. Expansion follows surplus, not sentiment. Sequencing is the difference between a refuge and a revolving door. Compassion without load-bearing architecture is not virtue. It is collapse delayed. The long-term vision is not a gated enclave of productivity, nor an open door that invites unsustainable load that collapses under strain. It is a sequenced architecture in which founders stabilize the framework, enterprises generate surplus, and rehabilitation expands proportionally to strength. Care grows because the foundation can hold it. Compassion can only survive when it is designed to carry weight. Once the permanent membership of the village is stable, the doors can be opened for those who need rehabilitation and support. A stewardship economy must track one central equation with clarity and humility. Total productive capacity must meet or exceed total care and infrastructure load. This is not a cold calculation. It is the foundation of dignity. Every community, whether it acknowledges it or not, survives on the relationship between what it can produce and what it must sustain. Food must be grown, structures maintained, children educated, elders supported, injuries treated, and emotional fractures repaired. If care needs consistently outpace production, strain accumulates invisibly until it erupts as resentment or collapse. If production vastly outpaces care without reinvestment, burnout and dehumanization follow. The work of stewardship is therefore to monitor this balance continuously, neither denying the numbers nor allowing them to dominate moral judgment. Different phases of life illustrate this dynamic clearly. In early childhood, care needs are high and productive contribution is minimal. Over time, this curve shifts. Adolescents require less intensive care and begin contributing meaningfully to communal life. Elders often follow the reverse curve. Adults move through fluctuating phases of surplus and deficit depending on injury, pregnancy, burnout, illness, or recovery. A healthy community recognizes these life phase arcs as predictable waves rather than crises. Demographic design becomes a form of long-term compassion. To maintain sustainability without compromising dignity, the community uses a shared capacity dashboard, both at the village level and at the network level, that reflects the balance between production, care, infrastructure demands, and available reserves. These indicators are presented only at the aggregate level and are designed to inform collective awareness rather than evaluate individual contribution. The system does not track or display individual productivity, household performance, or comparative output. No rankings, scores, or reputation metrics are generated. The purpose of the dashboard is to make structural imbalances visible so they can be addressed at the system level, not to assign responsibility to specific individuals. By limiting visibility to shared conditions rather than personal performance, the community preserves a culture of mutual responsibility while preventing the emergence of competitive or punitive dynamics. Balancing capacity requires active levers. When care load begins to exceed production, the first adjustment is intake calibration. New members being considered during these times are assessed not only for alignment with community values, but also for their ability to participate in a way that supports overall capacity balance. A skilled builder, farmer, teacher, or nurse may restore surplus. When imbalance concentrates in one location, population redistribution across the network can restore equilibrium. High-capacity members may rotate into care-heavy villages, or dependents may shift into villages with greater surplus. This federated structure prevents any single node from bearing disproportionate strain. Periods of stress must be named rather than hidden. When surplus narrows, the community formally enters maintenance mode. Maintenance care guarantees food, housing, medical stabilization, and relational safety, while pausing high-investment rehabilitation initiatives. When abundance returns, the system reinvests in advanced rehabilitation, trauma therapy, skill development, addiction recovery, and accelerated learning. Care is thus framed not as charity, but as capital allocation. Stabilizing a burned-out adult restores long-term productivity. Investing in child development secures continuity. Rehabilitation becomes an economic strategy as much as a moral one. Measurement, however, must not become technocracy. Quantitative tracking within the stewardship model operates at the level of system capacity, not individual worth. Productive output, care demand, and infrastructure load are measured in aggregate to understand whether the community as a whole is operating within sustainable limits. While participation history may be used in a limited and functional sense to support role rotation and prevent imbalance, the system does not track or evaluate individual performance in a way that ranks, scores, or conditions a person standing within the community. The purpose of measurement is to maintain structural awareness, not to create systems of comparison or control. Data is aggregated and transparent at the system level to prevent rumor and resentment, while individual contribution records remain private and developmental rather than punitive. Numbers inform decisions. They do not replace judgment. The dashboard exists to prevent silent collapse, not to rank human worth. Ultimately, a stewardship community survives by balancing two principles. Imbalance must be addressed, and dignity must remain intact. Emotional hesitation cannot override structural reality, and structural correction cannot ignore human fragility. When the equation is honored openly, the village avoids both hidden burnout an authoritarian drift. Production sustains care, care restores production, and belonging is preserved across generations. That is not utopian optimism. It is disciplined stewardship.